Swiss Frankie.
Yeah, full tribe in the building. Full tribe static addict. Melchizedek media. Melchizedek music. Yeah, the push.
www.swissfrankie.com.
Stay focused. Yeah, how will we choose? We worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused. Don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused. It's for like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused. Hebrew, we got next. I preach the Melchizedek. Stay focused. Yeah, how will we choose? We worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused. Don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused. It's for like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused. Hebrew, we got next. So never abandon your post.
Keep your eyes on the prize. I'm not talking about no dollar sign. The kingdom's at hand, that's the plan, my man. Spiritual gifts is what I store up. Waiting for the sun to show up. Then Babylon gon' burn up, and them gold streets gon' turn up. There'll be love for thy neighbor, will be heavenly favor. Now true love's what you get when you live in the script. So tune in to this vibration. We from his holy nation, here to give words to the ears that hear. Screaming Yahshua's coming till he appears. Cry loud and spare not bruise. Now that scripture strong in the faith in this heavenly race. Washed by the blood of Yahweh Shah, that's grace.
Stay focused. Yeah, how will we choose? We worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused. Don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused. It's for like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused. Hebrew, we got next. I preach the Melchizedek. Stay focused. Yeah, how will we choose? We worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused. Don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused. It's for like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused. Hebrew, we got next. So never abandon your post.
Shalom, family. It's your little brother Benign coming at you with another video. If it's the Most High's will, I would like to make a series of videos leading up to the revealing of the beast in the book of Revelation. I'm going to try to be as thorough as possible and present all the evidence that I have collected to support my findings on who the beast is. We're going to start with the book of Daniel, along with Wikipedia and other sources for historical facts and evidence to present this case. By the time we reach the book of Revelation, I would have liked to have revealed all the characters in the books and who are those countries/nations today who make up the 10 toes and the harlot that rides the beast. Now, this is my own personal study and you don't have to agree with it, but I hope to present such a strong case that even if you don't agree with it, you might consider it. Let's begin. The purpose of this video is to see if we can pinpoint who are the 10 toes in the book of Daniel, who were also the 10 kings in the book of Revelation that is given power to rule for 1 hour with the beast. In the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about the things that are to come in our lifetime. Through the Spirit of the Most High, Daniel interprets the dream for the king and tells him about the kingdoms or empires that shall rule from the time of ancient Babylon until the return of the Messiah. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar the things that each kingdom will do, and thankfully, we have historical facts that helps confirms what Daniel said and expose who those perpetrators are today. After we find who the actors are that fill the roles of the characters Daniel wrote about, in the next video, we will search for the whore who rides the beast, if it is the Most High's will. So let's start by reading Daniel's interpretation of the dream. For the sake of time, we won't read the entire chapter, just Daniel's interpretation. If you get a chance, go back and read the entire chapter for more clarity. Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, and his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broke into pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Daniel describes in detail to the king the image that he saw in his dream. 5 kingdoms. Some say it's 4 kingdoms, but the 5th kingdom is an extension of the 4th and is mixed with clay, making it slightly different from the 4th that is made of just iron. The purpose of this video is to find who are those 10 toes made of iron and clay. Let us continue to read to see if Daniel give us any clues or leads so that we can start our search for the 10 toes. Daniel chapter 2, verse 37. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another 3rd kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Daniel give us a lead on our search by giving us the identity of the head made of gold. The head made of gold is Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom of Babylon, and the rest of the kingdoms to follow will be inferior to each one that precedes them. Verse 41, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. If you look at the statue from head to toe, you will notice the value of the metals decrease as we descend down the statue, showing each kingdom to be inferior to the one before it. The first kingdom is made of gold, while the second is made of silver. Although gold is more valuable than silver, the silver kingdom will overtake and subdue the gold kingdom. Although silver is more valuable than bronze, the bronze kingdom will overtake and subdue the silver kingdom. Likewise, bronze is more valuable than iron, yet the iron kingdom will overtake and subdue the bronze kingdom. Lastly, iron is more valuable than clay, yet the clay kingdom will partially subdue and overtake the iron kingdom, and ultimately mix with them, becoming a kingdom mixed with both iron and clay. Think of it in terms of statues. A gold statue is more prestigious than a silver statue. A silver statue is more prestigious than a bronze. Bronze over iron and iron over clay, which can be easily broken. This represents an underdog coming out victorious. Here's a gold statue of Mao. You make a gold statue of someone, you're really saying something. Now, here's a silver statue of Abraham Lincoln. This is very prestigious. Following that is a bronze statue of a soldier. And then down here, we have an iron statue of a mayor. And then the clay statue, which can be easily broken. So if we think about the empires that's going to follow Nebuchadnezzar, each one are going to be inferior in one way or another to the one that it conquers. Let us continue. Verse 44. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. And it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great Elohim hath made known to the king what shall come pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. So verse 44 says that in the days that the 10 toes rule, Yah will set up a kingdom that shall not be destroyed. So at some point during the time of the 10 toes, Yah's kingdom will be set up. Notice it didn't say after the time of the 10 toes, but suggests that at some point, Yah's kingdom and the 10 toes kingdom will exist at the same time. I believe that we are living in the days of the 10 toes right now. Now, Daniel skips from the 10 toes and jumps straight to the stone, which is Christ smiting the image on its feet. But Revelation fills in the time gap with some other very important things to happen before the rock strikes. That's why I believe that it's imperative for us to find the actors who will fill the roles that Daniel and the book of Revelation speaks of. Let's continue. So now that we know that the first kingdom is Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, we can use that info to find the inferior kingdoms that came after him. The process is really simple. All we have to do is find out who conquered Babylon. And that kingdom should be the silver. Then we figure out who conquered the silver kingdom. And that would be the bronze kingdom. Whoever conquered the bronze kingdom will be the iron. And whoever conquered the iron should be the clay. Let's now check the historical records to see what people conquered the Babylonians. It is a well-known fact that the Persians, led by King Cyrus, conquered Babylon in 539 BC. Persia was a young nation at the time, yet it was able to subdue the more powerful Babylonian empire. Not only was Persia much younger than Babylon, but it is also reported that the Persians took the capital of Babylon with little to no fight. Basically, they just walked in and took over the capital. Babylon was the epicenter of the world, the leaders of technology and science at the time. Yet Babylon was conquered by the inferior Persians, just as Daniel said would happen. So now we know that the Persians are the silver part of Daniel's statue. So all we have to do to find the bronze is to find out who conquered the Persians. Then we should find the bronze. Now, it is also a well-known fact that the Persian Empire was conquered by Alexander the Greek. At this time, the Greeks were a slightly secluded people, a small community that basically kept to themselves, right? Now, as the Persian Empire grew larger and more powerful, they began to sweep across the world from east to west, subduing many nations and enlarging the boundaries of the empire that their predecessors, the Babylonians, once held. The Greeks successfully resisted the Persians' expansion and held their grounds. And if you look over to the right of this map, or to the left of this map, we'll see this is the Babylonian Empire in 606 or 536 BC. Now, for those of you who know your history, at this time, Israel is in Babylon, or at least the southern kingdom is in Babylon since approximately 586 BC. Shortly after that, the Persians came and conquers Babylon. I'm going to zoom out. And as you can see, if you can see the boundaries of the Babylonian Empire on your left, where you see Turkey up in the left corner. In the what's that? The Cartman Sea. You see the boundary. You see how the empires started to grow. Now, stories like the movie 300 tells us, it tells how the underdog Greeks fought against the Persians. In fact, the Persians eventually exhausted their treasury fighting the Greeks, who should have been easily conquered, but the prevailing of the Greeks proved Daniel's word to be true, that each kingdom will be conquered by an inferior kingdom. Now, we have found the bronze, right? The Greeks are the bronze, or the midsection, that conquered the silver Persians. So let us continue in our search for the 10 toes. Now, we all know that the ancient Greeks fell to the Romans. The fall of the Greeks has a more complex story, than the ones before it. In its early years, the Romans shared Italy with several other people. The prosperous and technologically sophisticated Greeks had established colonies at Italy's southern tip. So down here at this yellow, you see the Greeks right here at the bottom of Italy, right? The rest of their empire is on the other side of this ocean. And here's the Romans. Now, the Romans, they end up uniting the Etruscans, the Umbrians, the Samnites, and Messapians, whatever that says. Messapians, and Apollians. Okay, Messapians and Apollians, that's who they are. The Italioites, Italiotes, right? And then you had the Carthaginians. So these are the ancient people that the Rome ends up uniting, and they become known as Romans. But yet, the Greek colonies at the tip will still exist for a short period of time. By the year 218, the Romans had unified the Italian peninsula, while the Macedonians broke off into 4 kingdoms after the death of Alexander: the blue, green, and yellow, and pink that you see on your map. This is during the time of the Maccabees. Now, Rome ends up going to war with the Phoenicians across the water, and while doing so, the Greek Empire tries to sneak attack the Romans. The Greeks really should have destroyed the Romans at that time, but the Romans, they made peace with the Greeks to buy some time, and defeated the Phoenicians, and then turned their attention to the Greeks, and conquered each one of them one by one, proving again that each kingdom will be taken down by an inferior people, because at this time, the Romans their technology and their sophistication or culture was really less than the Greeks at the time. The Greeks are the ones who brought Hellenization. The Romans were Hellenized by the Greeks. Now, remember Daniel said that the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. The Romans would go on to create one of the greatest armies the world has ever seen. That's how it got its name, the War Machine. There wasn't a city in antiquity that could withstand the Romans. In fact, modern military of today all use Roman tactics in one form or another when engaged in battle. Now, so it's common knowledge that the Romans or the 4th kingdom made of iron. So now that we have found the first 4 actors to fit the characters that Daniel spoke of, we should be able to use that same method of finding the 10 toes mixed with iron and miry clay. This is why there is 5 kingdoms, in my opinion. The 5th one, what will be part iron, or part Rome, and will be mixed with another people inferior to the Romans that Daniel called the miry clay, technically making a fifth kingdom because these are the people whom the rock strikes and cause the entire statue to collapse. Now, if you're like me, you might think to yourself that since it was as simple as Googling who conquered what empire from the Babylonians down to the Romans, all we should have to do is to Google who conquered Rome, right? Well, here is where things get murky. When you Google who conquered Rome, the first thing you get is a name of a king, but not the name of his people or a kingdom. All the previous empires gave us the name of who conquered it and the name of their people. We have Persian King Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon. Macedonian King Alexander the Great conquered Persia. We didn't get the name of the king who ruled Rome at the time of the defeat of the Macedonians because the Romans had a new and different military system with war generals and so on, but it definitely tells us it was the Romans. But for Rome, we get a name of a chieftain and the word German, which was not used then as we use the word German today to describe a country and the people who live in it. The word Germania was a word made by the Romans that basically translate to barbarians today. The first author to describe the Germani or Germani as a large category of people distinct from the Gauls and Scythians was Julius Caesar, writing around 55 BC during his governorship of Gaul. In Caesar's account, the clearest defining characteristic of the Germani people was that they lived east of the Rhine, opposite Gaul on the west side. So if you're looking at this map here, up here we have the Gallic tribes. The Gallic tribes. And the Rhine River, which, by the way, is drying up today, starts up here at this Baltic Sea at the top. Let me get a pointer. Laser pointer right here. Here we go. So we're going to zoom in with the laser pointer. So at the top right here is the Rhine River, as the Rhine River comes down right here. And to the east of the Rhine River are the Germanic tribes. So this isn't Germany. This isn't what you know as Germany today. It was a group of people that they call Germanic, which translate to barbarian today. And to the left of that are the Gallic tribes, right? Now this is 218 BC. This would be somewhere during the time of 3rd Maccabees when they write to the Romans. I think that's 3rd Maccabees. So here is what Rome looked like during the time of Julius Caesar. Germany or Germany or Germania encompassed multiple groups of people that the Romans refer to as barbarians. So this is 68 to 69 AD, right? This is what it looked like at the fall of Jerusalem. So we're going to zoom in. So this was Rome. Everything you see here in the red and the gray. Now, in this last slide, these were the Gallic tribes right here. But they became the people, the Romans, as they expanded and conquered. So this is 218 BC. A little 150 years later, something like that, those people are now part of the Roman Empire. So they've been westernized or Hellenized or civilized, as the Romans would say, but they have been introduced to the Roman way and given the Romans gods. But the people that still over to the right of the Rhine River are barbarians, according to the Romans. That's why when you Google who conquered Rome, you basically get what translates to a barbarian king named Odoacer. From there, it gets even murkier. All the information you receive just name the people Germanic or barbarians, as if somehow the world doesn't know who these mysterious people are. Like they just conquered Rome and then they left Earth. They all got in the spaceship and they left Earth, and don't nobody know who these people are. We don't know who they are today.
The collapse of the Roman Empire in the year 476 AD, brought about by the relentless invasions of barbarian tribes, ended a magnificent civilization that had dominated Europe for almost 10 centuries.
In the end, it was Rome's failure to withstand the constant invasions and mass immigration of barbarians that brought it to its end. The ravaging of the Huns in the east led many barbarian tribes to seek shelter within the Roman Empire.
In 476, the stage was set for the final act. A general of the Roman Federati, Odoacer, overthrew Rome's last Western emperor, the young, ironically named Romulus Augustus. He spared the boy's life, but did not claim the title of Roman Emperor. Instead, he sent the imperial regalia to the Eastern Emperor Zeno, saying it was no longer necessary, as the West no longer needed an emperor. The Western Roman Empire, which had stood for over 1,000 years, had fallen. It's easy for us to look back on Rome and look at 476 as the defining moment the Roman Empire fell. Almost as if one moment Rome was there, the next it was gone. But it is important to keep in mind that Rome did not fall in a day. 476 is the accepted symbolic date for the fall of the Western Empire, but the influence of the empire would continue on for quite a while afterward. It is important to note that many of these Germanic peoples who we see as overthrowing the Roman Empire were, in their view, simply integrating themselves into Rome and becoming Romans.
See, all they're going to tell you initially is that the people who conquered Rome were barbarians, aka Germanes. If you want to know more, you have to dig deeper into the word barbarians. Throughout history, the agreed upon meaning of the word barbarians has changed in a sense. But here's what it meant to the Romans. In ancient Rome, the Romans adapted and used the term towards tribal non-Romans, such as the Berbers, Germanics or Germanics, Celts, Iberians, Thracians, Illyrians, and Sarmatians. For this lesson, we're going to focus on just the Germanics and the Celts. Technically, the Celts are Germanic people, or were once Germanic people, according to the Romans' use of the word, being people outside of their borders, those who spoke another language and had a different culture, and a way to the Romans were considered uncivilized or barbarians. The Celts were once barbarians until they were conquered by the Romans. They would become slaves to the Romans, given the Romans gods and way of life, thus becoming civilized and gaining Roman citizenship. Here is a map showing the migration of the Celtic people from east to west, starting from Central Europe in 275 BC, roughly 200 years before the term Germani or barbarian will be uttered out of the mouth of Julius Caesar in 56 BC. The yellow is the core or the origins of the Celts in 6th century BC. This is around the time the southern kingdom were carried away to Babylon. The lighter green around the yellow and in Old England is where the Celts expanded to by 275 BC. The two darkest green is basically where the majority of the more pure Celts descendants are today. So if you can see here, these people right here, because the Rhine River starts right here and it comes down here. So these people were considered the Gallic people, and these are where the Celts dwelled as well. Now, these are the people who became Romanized as the Roman Empire expanded across the northern and western Europe, no longer being inferior barbarians, but eventually civilized Roman citizens. The Celts will be one of the barbarian tribes who will help to bring down Rome. Now, as you can see, the word Celts encompassed a large group of peoples. That's a large area right here, starting with, right now, I believe this will be southern Germany and southern France and Burgundy. This is where this has encompassed a lot of people. So the Celts wasn't just one tribe of people. Celts consist of Gauls, Celtiberians, Gallices, Galatians, Lepontes, Britons, Gauls, and their offshoots. These people traveled and mixed together, that one name for them became synonymous with the other: Celts, Britons, Gauls. On the 218 BC map, you see the Gallic tribes. In Julius Caesar's book, The Gallic Wars, Caesar said that these people all claimed to be direct descendants from gods. Not that their ruler or king was a god, like the pharaohs of Egypt and the Caesars of Macedonia and Rome, but that all of them were descendants from gods. He writes, all the Gauls assert that they are descended from the god Dis, and say that this tradition has been handed down by the Druids. Julius Caesar, The Gallic Wars, Book 4, Chapter 18. Julius Caesar associated the Celt gods with the Roman god of the underworld, Dis Pater. But I doubt that this is the same god that the Norse were referring to. I think Julius was using syncretism. But what is interesting is that they don't claim to be formed from the dust of the earth like our fathers were told, but being the actual descendants or children of the gods with a little g. As we go through the list of barbarian tribes, we're going to learn that they all practice Germanic paganism. They all claim to be descendants of the gods, not just the rulers, like I said, like the pharaohs of Egypt, the leaders of these other empires claim to be, but every one of them, from the greatest to the least of them, claim to be descendants of the gods. The Celts always had a father god, a mother god, and a son god, even prior to their full conversion to Christianity. They already honored a trinity before they were converted to Christianity. It says the Celts seem to have had a father god, who was often a god of the tribe and of the dead, and a mother goddess, who was associated with the land, earth, and fertility. There also seems to have been a male celestial god, identified with Tyrannus, associated with thunder, like Thor, the whale, and the bull. Triplicity is a common theme in Celtic cosmology, and a number of deities were seen as threefold. Like I said, the Celts are just one of the 10 toes. They consist of the people who already inhabited the lands that the Roman Empire conquered for the most part. The other 9 toes will come from Central and Northern Europe, or Germany, as the previous map showed. As we can see on the map, here's the Roman Empire at its full extent. And here's the Rhine River that separates this red from the white. And everyone over here is Germania, and you notice the Norse up here. So in the previous slide, the Celts were of the Gallic tribes that dwelt here. They became a part of the Roman Empire. The other 9 barbarian tribes are the Sciri, the Goths, the Lombards, the Suebi, the Burgundy, the Vandals, the Anglo-Saxons, the Alemanni, and the Franks. Most of these barbarian kingdoms came westward, fleeing from the Huns, while the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes were basically looking for more land. This is what the Europeans call the Great Migration Period. So if you look at this map, here we have the Saxons, along with the Angles and the Jutes. And there's actually another tribe with them called the Frisians, who aren't on this map, right? These people will move over to what we call England, or called England in Britain, and what is known as the UK today. Now remember, in the previous map, the people who had already lived here were Celts and Gauls, and they had already moved into this area. So in this area, you basically have Gauls, which consists of Celts and everything else in that list, and the Anglos, the Saxons, the Jutes, and the Frisians became known as the Anglo-Saxons, right? Then you have the Lombards, who are right here. They will eventually move down, but maybe I'll keep it in order, timeline order. So if you look at the timeline over here, you'll see the Goths before 150. Okay, and they come from this Germany area, right? This is really what you would call Russia right now. Now, there's evidence that they came up here from the Scandinavian area down to here. But here's the record of the Goths landing here and then moving south and then splitting to Visigoths and Ostrogoths. Visigoths simply mean the Western Goths. Ostrogoths means Eastern Goths. If you look at the migration of the Visigoths will eventually move into Spain. The Ostrogoths move in through Constantinople. Not Constantinople. They will move into Italy, down into Rome throughout time. The Lombards will come down throughout time. Of course, we already saw that the Sciri, which isn't on this map, but we can't deny that the actual Germanic king who conquered Rome, he was a Scirian, Odoacer. So the Scirians, they come down. We have the Vandals. And all of these people are being chased by the Huns. Now, these people all claim to be children of the gods. And what's interesting is through my study, I learned that although that they were the children of the gods who end up terrorizing Rome, they claim to have been running from the children of demons. That's interesting. But I'm going to continue. So the migration period was a period in European history marked by large-scale migrations that saw the fall of the Western Roman Empire and subsequent settlement of its former territories by various tribes. The first migration of peoples were made by Germanic tribes such as the Goths, including the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, the Anglo-Saxons, the Lombards, the Suebi, or sometimes pronounced Sueve with a V, the Frisi, the Jutes, the Burgundians, the Alemanni, the Sciri, and the Franks. They were later pushed westward by the Huns, the Avars, the Slavs, and the Bulgars. This is what Cornelius Tacitus said. For myself, I concur in opinion with such as suppose the people of Germany never to have mingled by intermarriages with other nations, but to have remained a people pure and independent, and resembling none but themselves. Hence, among such a mighty multitude of men, the same make and form is found in all. Eyes stern and blue, yellow hair, huge bodies, but vigorous only in the first onset. Of pains and labors they are not equally patient, nor can they at all endure thrift and heat. To bear hunger and cold they are hardened by their climate and soil. Cornelius described them as not mixing with others, and all resembling the same, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and having huge bodies. He said that they were built for the cold and could not endure the heat. This is why Hitler said that the pure German was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, if you remember that the pure German, because these people did not mix with other nations, according to Cornelius, who lived somewhere in the 1st and 2nd century AD. And obviously, Cornelius didn't look like them, because he says right here that they resembling none but themselves. So even Cornelius or the Greeks or the Romans did not resemble the people who was on the other side of these Rhines, because they were pure. By the time Cornelius is living in the 1st and 2nd century AD, the previous people, the Celts, had been conquered by 275 BC. So if we take 275 years and add to it, I don't know, maybe 75 years to it, we'll take the medium between 56 AD and 120 AD, and we'll say maybe, I don't know, 40 years, okay? Look like there's 70 years there, we'll say 35 years. So 35 years with the 275, we're talking about 305 years, right? So if 305 years of those Roman people mixing with the Gallic tribes or the Celts, they started to look a certain way. But he said that the people on the other side of the Rhine, right, did not mingle or have intermarriage with other nations, and that they resembled none but themselves, all having blue eyes, yellow hair, and huge bodies. Most of these barbarian kingdoms came from Russia, more or less. If you see that blue dot on the far right here, that says Ostrogoths 200 to 375, that spot is what we call Ukraine today. The water below it is the Black Sea. So that spot right there is Ukraine. I'll go back to the other map. Bang. This spot right here, that's Ukraine. This is Crimea. Right? We're right here, Ukraine, Crimea. This is what Russia and Ukraine are, where Russia and Ukraine is fighting. Now, we know that Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia is supposed to be the buffer zone to separate the Western Europeans, right? These Western Europeans, right? These Western Europeans from Russia, right? And for almost, 2,000 years ago, these Western Europeans migrated from this area, being chased by the Huns coming from here and the Slavs, according to what we have read so far. In the late 4th century, the lands of the Goths were invaded from the east by the Huns. This is the late 4th century. So that's the year 300 and something. This is before Rome fell. Rome doesn't fall until 476. So we're talking about in the late 4th century, year 300 to 400 is the 4th century. So 100 years before Rome begins to fall, or Rome's finally its agreed upon date of falling. The Huns are chasing the Ostrogoths across Europe, from Eastern Europe into Western Europe. It says, in the aftermath of this event, several groups of Goths came under Hunnic domination, while others migrated further west or sought refuge inside the Roman Empire. These Goths would form the Visigoths, and under their king Alaric I, they began a long migration, eventually establishing a Visigothic kingdom in Spain and Toledo. So they become the Western Goths, and these Goths will eventually come all the way to Spain, right? And then establish a Visigothic kingdom, right? Let us continue. The Sciri. The Sciri, or Scyrians, were Germanic people. They are believed to have spoken an East Germanic language. Their name probably mean the pure ones. This is consistent with Tacitus said. In the late 460s AD, Odoacer, another son of Edico, attained high status within the Roman army in Italy. So, the actual barbarian king, Odoacer, right? Another son of Edico, he attained high status within the Roman army in Italy. So he was in the Roman army, running from the Ostrogoths, the Huns and everything. These people get pushed into Rome. He's in Rome for a while, and he is in their military. Odoacer eventually, in the late 460s AD, Odoacer, another son of Edico, attained a high status within the Roman army in Italy, ruling Sciri, Rugi, and other non-Roman peoples as a king. Odoacer eventually made himself king of Italy in 476 AD, effectively ending the Western Roman Empire. Remaining elements of the Sciri might have settled in modern-day Bavaria. So, we see these Sciri people still exist in this modern-day Bavaria, and we're going to see that they're in other places as well. So this is Odoacer. He was in the Roman military, and he's conquering Romulus, the last Western emperor, Romulus. And you see these barbarians with their wolf skins on, and they look like your everyday barbarian. And later, maybe 400 years after this, the Vikings. See their little helmets and everything, right? Are different than these Romans. These Romans were sophisticated. The Romans took the Western world, or the Hellenization that was given to them by the Greeks, and really distributed it to the world. There was public education. There was, universities. There were, the average person could read. It was a real Western society like today. But these barbarians who had came from the east, being chased by the Huns into the west, they didn't write their history. So the only history that you have of them are what you read from other people. or what they eventually, I'll just leave it at that, what you read from other people, because these people didn't have a need for writing their history. I want you to think about that for a second. We're talking about 4th and 5th century BC, and these people still weren't writing their history down. We're talking about only 1,500 years ago from today. These people didn't know what paper were or what paper is. I'm going to just leave it at that. With paper, pencils, ink, well, they had ink because they tattooed themselves, but they didn't write their history. Let me put it that way. I'm not going to say that they didn't write. They didn't have a need to write their history, write the things that happened to them, where they came from, or whatever. Showing that the people who conquered Rome will be inferior to the Romans. In fact, it's because of their lack of education that they immediately go into the Dark Ages once Rome falls. Immediately go into the Dark Ages. There's like a regression in knowledge, a regression in technology, a regression in agriculture, because it's like almost, I'm going to just say, I want to say the dumbest people in the world, but barbarians, that's what the Romans called them, took over Rome. Now, in 476 AD, this is what it looked like the year that Rome fell. And if we zoom in right here, we can see Odoacer's kingdom. He conquered Rome and he took over this whole peninsula. So these are those barbarians who were running from the west over here into Rome. These are the places where they settled. Okay, you see the Suebe is up here, where you would call Portugal today, Portugal. Visigoths, right? Even though they eventually get chased out of there, but I'm going to show you how they came back. Burgundians, the Alemannis, the Franks, the Anglo-Saxons, the Romano-Britons. These are the Celts who had became Romanized by this time. This is 476 AD. They have been Romanized for about 700 years, but they still kept a pagan custom, although they were Romanized. You see the Ostrogoths, which are the Eastern Goths, right? So let's look at the Goths. The Goths, excuse me. In ancient sources, the Goths are always described as tall and athletic, with light skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes, just like Tacitus said. The 4th century Greek historian Eunapius described their characteristic powerful musculature in a pejorative way. Their bodies provoked contempt in all who saw them, for they were far too big and far too heavy for their feet to carry them, and they were pinched in at the waist, just like those insects Aristotle writes of. Procopius notes that the Vandals and the Gepids looked similar to the Goths, and on this basis he suggested that they were all of common origin. Of the Goths, he wrote that they all have white bodies and fair hair and are tall and handsome to look upon. Again, this is Eunapius. Obviously, he must have looked different, whether this is Eunapius or Procopius. And he described them the same way that Tacitus did 400 years before. 400 years prior to this, Tacitus described them the same way. Initially practicing Gothic paganism, the Goths were gradually converted to Arianism in the course of the 4th century. So this is shortly after they conquered Rome, because from 400 to 500, from 0 to 1 is the 1st century, right? 0 to 1 is 1st century. So 3 to 4 is the 4th century, right? They were converted to Arianism. Arian theology holds that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, who was begotten by God the Father, with the difference that the Son of God did not always exist, but was begotten within time by God the Father. Therefore, Jesus was not co-eternal with God the Father. Now, every last one of these barbarian tribes were first converted to Arian Christianity. It was easier for them to accept. North mythology teaches that Thor is the son of Odin, conceived from Odin's loins, and didn't exist prior to Odin creating him. They were able to accept Christianity through syncretism of a trinity, synchronizing the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost given to them. I'm sorry, did I say Holy Ghost? Because it was the Father, the Son, and Mary, the Holy Mother, given to them by the Roman Catholics to their already held belief of Odin, Freya, and Thor. Therefore, Yahshua was not co-eternal with Yah to them. He would have to share the same story as Thor, being created by Odin. That's how that they accepted it, through syncretism. The Visigothic kingdom in Hispania converted to Catholicism in the late 6th century, right? So that's from 5 to 6. The Ostrogoths and their remnant, the Crimean Goths. Crimea is where the war kicked off with Russia and Ukraine. So I want you to know where these people are, what they look like, and where they come from. The Ostrogoths and their remnants, the Crimean Goths, were closely connected to the Patriarchate of Constantinople from the 5th century and became fully incorporated under the Metropolitanate of Gothia from the 9th century. And those were basically Eastern Orthodox Christianity. That's what Constantinople's Christianity was. When Rome divided the East and West, that's what that Christianity went to. Eastern Rome. Western Rome fell. They fell. And those that were there were either pagans. If they had Christianity at that time, they were Arianists or Arianism, where Christ was, not co-eternal or even the firstborn. He was created whenever their God made him. Now, the English word God itself is cognate with the Gothic word guth for a pagan idol, presumably a wooden statue of the kind paraded by Winguric on a chariot when he challenged the Gothic Christians to worship the tribal gods, executing them after they refused. It became the word for the Christian God in the Gothic Bible. So the word that you use for God, that we use for God, that we can't help but to say, it came from the Goths. How did it come to the Goths? How did the word that they speak become written in our Bible? We're going to have to get to that in another video. Now it reads, in light of the comparative evidence from later forms of Germanic paganism, it seems likely that the Germanic trinity of Wodenaz, Tuaz, and Dunraz, which is Thor, may have had a parallel among the Goths, with the names Goth, Tus, and Fergunes. You see that the father's name is Goth. Tus, this is who your Tuesday is named after, and Fergunes. Goth or Goth, the ancestor of the Amali dynasty and presumably eponymous of the entire people of the Goths. Old Norse Goth in later centuries was considered another name for Odin in Scandinavia. Like I said, the Goths believed in a trinity prior to their conversion. Their head deity was called God in their language, and God is another name for Odin. Theodomir was succeeded by his son Theodoric in 471, who was forced to compete with Theodoric Strabo, leader of the Thracian Goths, for the leadership of his people. Fearing the threat posed by Theodoric to Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno, now remember when Odoacer took Rome in 476, would be 5 years after what we're reading now, he sent the crown back to Zeno and said it won't be needed over here because there's no more emperor in the west. So there was a Western emperor and an Eastern emperor, right? So the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno ordered Theodoric to invade Italy in 488. So this is how barbarian soldiers was in the Roman army. They were using what's the word it's called today? I can't remember the word. When you levy someone's military, I can't remember the word right now. Forgive me, but they were using these people to fight the other barbarians. Like they were hiring barbarians to fight barbarians because the barbarians were very warlike people. They were much larger, much bigger, and they've been trained to fight since they were little boys. The Western civilization was to be civilized, to be educated, to be what you might call bougie today and everything. And you know, I mean, they had warriors amongst them, but it wasn't like the barbarians, like when you are old enough to pick up a sword, you pick one up and that's what you did the rest of your life. So they had to get other barbarians to fight other barbarians. So the Eastern Emperor Zeno gets Theodoric to invade Italy in 488. By 493, Theodoric had conquered all of Italy from the Skirian, Odoacer, whom he killed with his own hands. He subsequently formed the Ostrogothic kingdom. So the Eastern Emperor sent the Ostrogoths in, right? Here's the Eastern Empire right here. It's Constantinople, right where the red dot is. He hires some Ostrogoths to go in and clear out Odoacer's kingdom, right? And they go in and clear out Odoacer's kingdom, but then they set up their own kingdom called the Ostrogoths kingdom. So the Scaries only held, this area for about 25 years. This is 476 AD. You see the Odoacer's kingdom right here in the blue. And then this is 500. This is 24 years later. The Ostrogoths, this Ostrogoth kingdom, they took over. They didn't give it to the Eastern Empire like Zeno wanted it. They took it for themselves, right? Because they're barbarians. Theodoric settled his entire people in Italy, estimated at 100 to 200,000 people, mostly in the northern part of the country, and ruled the country very efficiently. The Goths in Italy constituted a small minority of population in the country. Intermarriage between Goths and Romans were forbidden, And Romans were also forbidden from carrying arms. So, recapping, originally this was Etruscans, Romans, you know, Sarmatians and Messapians, and they all dwelt here. And so then comes the Sciri and take over and make it the Sciri kingdom, right? Odoacer's kingdom. You think it was just Odoacer living there? Odoacer was there, and he was the king over the Scaries and over the Rugis. So they were living in this area and had been living there for 100 years. So you have barbarians and Romans living together so far right here in this kingdom, right? Because the fifth kingdom shall be iron mixed with clay. Not the clay taking over the iron, but the iron mixed with clay. We know that the iron is Rome, so the clay is definitely the barbarians, and they're mixing together right here. So you have the original Romans, then you had Odoacer's people come over and take over. Then you have Theodoric bring the Ostrogoths with 100 to 200,000 people, and they take over. Now, initially, they forbid intermarriage between the Goths and the Romans, right? But, you know, eventually that, you know, went away. After the last stand of the Ostrogothic king Tia and the battle of the Mons Lactaris in 533, Ostrogothic resistance ended, and the remaining Goths in Italy were assimilated by the Lombards, another Germanic tribe who invaded Italy and founded the kingdom of the Lombards in 567. So I'm going to show you this map now. So the Lombards, who were originally up here, right? By 633, they then came down and conquered the Eastern Goths, or the Ostrogothic kingdom, who had conquered the Sciri kingdom, who had conquered Western Rome. Now, when you conquer these people, everybody don't die. And people don't just pack up and leave like you're moving into the house and the previous owner's moving out of the house. These people are still there. They are swapping spit, swapping other fluids together for so long. So now the Lombards is down. So now we have 3 barbaric tribes down here with the Romans. Now, the Lombards absorbed the Ostrogoths into their kingdom, and after conquering and taking over the land, but we'll deal with the Lombards a little bit later. At the end of the 7th century, the Visigothic kingdom fell and was progressively conquered by the Umayyad Caliphate from 711 after the defeat of their last king, Roderick, at the Battle of Guadalete. Some Visigothic nobles found refuge in the mountain areas of the Asturias. The remnants of the Hispano-Gothic aristocracy still played an important role in the society of Hispania. At the end of the Visigothic rule, the assimilation of Hispano-Romans and Visigoths were occurring at a fast pace. Their nobility had begun to think of themselves as consisting one people. The gens Gothorum, or the Hispani, an unknown number of them fled and took refuge in Austrias or Septimania. So I'm going to explain that and break that down. So first of all, remember that the Visigoths moved into Spain. But the Celts were already here up in Spain, right? Then the Suevi, right? More barbarians came up here. So we got Sueves who moved up in here, right? And then you had the Visigoths who are down here. Now, in 711, the Moors will come across and conquer Spain, right? So when they come and conquer Spain, these Visigoths will flee up into the Asturias Mountains, right? Where there were already Celts and Suevi called Romano Gallis, right? Or Gotho Romanos, right? So and they will flee up here into the Austrias, and the Moorish Empire will basically rule down below for a good 700 years. But we're going to see what happens, right? So in 711 and 1031, this is where the Almohad Caliphate comes in and they're ruling Spain. Now, if you remember, it says right here that, where's that at? It says Austria. It said, here we go. Some Visigothic nobles found refuge in the mountain areas of Austria. So we're going to look at these two maps and compare. So it says, at the end of the 7th century, the Visigothic kingdom fell and was progressively conquered by the Umayyad Caliphate, or Caliphate. From 711, after the defeat of their last king Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete, some Visigothic nobles found refuge in the mountain areas of Asturias. So here's Asturias. I'm going the wrong way. I'm sorry. So here's Asturias. So the Visigoth nobles, they would go up into Asturias and find refuge. Now the people that was in Asturias prior to them, like I said, was the Suevi and the Celts. And there were some Vandals and there was some Visigoths up in there. Right. In the late 15th century was a unification of the Iberian Peninsula under Christian rule. So from 14 to 15, around the time of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal in 1492, within that century, the kings of Asturias, Leon Castile, that we saw in this map right here, the kings of Asturias, Leon Castile, where the Visigothic nobles went and took refuge at. The kings of Asturias, Leon Castile, declaring themselves the heirs of the Visigoths, claimed hegemony over the entire peninsula. The Visigoth nobles who hid in the mountains were now called by a different name after dwelling with the Celts and the Suevi and the other Goths for 700 years. Apparently, they kept their family lineage and history and were able to claim the throne back after the Moors were defeated by the European Christian nations. So they will get this area back. Spain, they came back out of these mountains and they will get this area back. Now, when the Moors took over this area, all the Goths that were there were kicked out. So as they come back and claim and defeat the Moors, they claim their land back. So it's safe to say that from 1400, during the time of the Jews' expulsion, these are the people who came down and had some part to do with it. So now we're going to talk about the Lombards. Now, according to their own legends, the Lombards originated in southern Scandinavia, including modern-day Denmark. The Lombards were joined by numerous Saxons, Heralds, Gepids, Bulgars, Thuringians, and Ostrogoths, and their invasion of Italy was almost unopposed. By 569, they had conquered all of northern Italy and the principal cities north of the Po River, except Pavia, which fell in 572. At the same time, they occupied areas in central in southern Italy. They established a Lombard kingdom in north and central Italy, later named Regnum Italicum, Kingdom of Italy. So as we showed before, here are the Lombards coming down into Italy. So what was the Lombards' religion prior to them coming into Rome? Well, there's a story written about how they got their name Lombards, because the name Lombard means longbeards. So here's their story that I'm going to read real quick about how they got their name Lombards, and then you will know who they worship. There is an island that is called Skadanen, which is interpreted destruction. So they understand this to be Scandinavia, and they're saying that is interpreted destruction. In the regions of the north, where many people dwell, among these there were a small people that were called the Winnows, and with them was a woman, Gambara by name, and she had 2 sons. Ebor was the name of the one, and Agio the name of the other. They, with their mother, Gambara by name, held the sovereignty over the Winnows. Then the leaders of the Vandals, that is, Ambri and Asi, moved with their army and said to the Winnows, either pay us tribute or prepare yourselves for battle and fight with us. Then answered Ebor and Agio with their mother Gambara, it is better for us to make ready the battle than to pay tribute to the Vandals. Then Ambri and Asi, that is, the leaders of the Vandals, asked Godon or Woden or Odin that he should give them the victory over the Winnows. Godon answered, saying, whom I shall first see when at sunrise, to them will I give the victory. At that time, Gambara with her 2 sons, that is, Ebor and Agio, who were chiefs over the Winnows, besought Freya, the wife of Godon, to be propitious to the Winnows. Then Freya gave counsel that at sunrise the Winnows should come, and that their women, with their hair let down around their face in the likeness of a beard, should also come with their husbands. Then when it became bright, while the sun was rising, Freya, the wife of Godon, turned around the bed where her husband was lying, and put his face toward the east and awakened him. So she didn't turn him over, she just turned the whole bed around. And he, looking at them, saw the Winnows and their women having their hair let down around the face. Now remember, he said whoever he wake up and see, that's who he will give the victory to. And he says, who are those Longbeards? And Freya said to Godon, as you have given them a name, give them also the victory. And he gave them the victory so that they should defend themselves according to his counsel and obtain the victory. From that time, the Winnows were called Longobards. Now this is Paul the Deacon's history of the Longobards, or the Lombards, or the Lombards, or the Longbeards, Appendix 2. The Winnerly changed their name to Lombards. They also changed their old agricultural fertility cult to a cult of Odin, thus creating a conscious tribal tradition. Froelich inverts the order of events in Priester and states that with the Odin cult, the Lombards grew their beards in resemblance of the Odin of tradition, and their new name reflected this. Bruckner remarks that the name of the Lombards stands in close relation to the worship of Odin, whose many names included the long-bearded or the gray-bearded, and that the Lombard given name Ansgranas, he with the beard of the gods, shows that the Lombards had this idea of their chief deity. So we clearly could see, just like the rest of the barbarians that we saw so far, the Goths had a Gothic paganism with Got, whose name was another name for Odin, his wife Tuz, and a son that represented thunder. Then we have here the Lombards, who also worship Odin, and they called his wife Freya so far, right? So when they entered Italy, some Lombards retained their native form of paganism, while some were Arian Christians. Hence, they did not enjoy good relation with the early Christian church. So they went into Italy, and some of them converted to Arian Christians, but some of them retained their form of paganism. A genetic study published in Science Advances in September 2018 examined the remains of a Lombard male buried at an Alemannic graveyard. Remember the Alemannis? He was found to be a carrier of the paternal haplogroup, and there's their haplogroups. The graveyard also included the remains of a Frankish and a Byzantine male, both of whom were also carriers of subclades of the paternal haplogroup. The Lombards, Frankish, and Byzantine males were all found to be closely related and displayed close genetics links to Northern Europe, particularly Lithuania and Iceland. So these were all the same people, or basically they shared a common ancestor, let's just say that. Now, as we know, the Lombards had absorbed the Ostrogoths into their kingdom after conquering it and taking it, right? So now we're going to talk about the Suevi and how the Suevi got to where they are. It says in the late 1st century AD, right, that will be 0 to 100, somewhere around where Jerusalem fell, most of the Suebi lived around the Elbe River. Dislodged by the Huns, some Suebi crossed the Rhine River and in 409 entered Spain, settling mainly in the northwest, Galatia. By 447, under their king Richella, the Suebi had spread over the Roman province of Lusitania and Baetica. Although the Suebi entered Spain as pagans, their king Ricard became Although the Suebi entered Spain as pagans, their king Riciar came to the throne as a Christian in 448. So we see the Suebi, who initially came from the Germanic tribes, right, of the north, and they would eventually come all the way down up into the kingdom of Suebi. And this is in 476 AD, is that correct? By 447, that's where they were. So when the Visigoths got chased up here by 711, which will be 200 to 300 years later, the Suebi were already there, as well as the Celts, as we had already said in the previous slide. The nation of the Suebi is by far the largest and the most warlike nation of all the Germans. They do not live much on corn, but subsist for the most part on milk and flesh, and are engaged in hunting. Even in the coldest part, they wear no clothing whatsoever, except skins, by reason of the scantiness of which a great portion of their body is bare, and besides, they bathe in open rivers. This is what Julius Caesar said in the Gallic War about the Suebi. Matching what Tacitus said, that they endure the cold because of where they come from, which was Northern Europe. Now the Suebe under King Hermeric, probably coming from the Alemanni, the Quadi, or both, worked their way into the south of France, eventually crossing the Pyrenees and entering the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain. Passing through the Basque Country, they settled in the Roman province of Galatia in northwestern Hispania, modern Galicia, Asturias, and the northern half of Portugal. So the Suebe settled, like we said, in that part that we call Portugal today. The Suebe remained mostly pagan and their subjects Priscillianists until an Arian missionary named Ajax, sent by the Visigothic king Theodoric II at the request of the Suebic unifier Remismund in 466, converted them and established a last Arian church which dominated the people until the conversion of Trinitarian Catholicism, the 560s. Another thing that I noticed is that these people, after they went from Arianism, they all established their own form of Christianity until one day they were all unified. We'll talk about that in a different video. Now, the Burgundians. The Burgundians, a Germanic tribe, may have migrated from the Scandinavian island of Bornholm to the Vistula basin in the 3rd century AD. So from 2 to 3 is the 3rd century. However, the first documented king of the Burgundians, Gabika, lived in the late 4th century east of the Rhine. Somewhere in the east, the Burgundians had converted to the Arian Christianity from earlier Germanic paganism. So they followed the same Norse belief as the other tribes we just went through, the Lombards, the Goths, the Suebe, the Celts. They all had the same religious belief. So we see the Burgundians here on this map in 476 AD when Rome fell and Odoacer takes over Italy. We see the Burgundian kingdom right here. And this is, it's like southern France today. Southern France today. So we're going to continue. The 5th century Gallo-Roman poet and landowner Sidonius, who at one point lived with the Burgundians, described them as a long-haired people of immense physical size. Why do you bid me compose a song dedicated to Venus? Placed as I am among long-haired hordes, having to endure Germanic speech, praising often with a wry face the song of the gluttonous Burgundian who spreads rancid butter on his hair. You don't have a reek of garlic and a foul onion discharged upon you at early morn from 10 breakfast, and you are not invaded before dawn by a crowd of giants. So this is the Gallo-Roman. Gallo-Roman means the Gallic Roman who had already been living in that land that was originally Gallic. See, he's here in Burgundy, but remember in that first map, this was the Gallic tribes on this side and then the Germanic tribes on this side. So he's living with these Burgundians, and he's saying that, they're tall, they got yellow hair, and they're barbarians. They reek, and they're rancid. So this is what it looked like in 455 BC. This is about 20 years before Rome fell. So we're going to talk about the Franks. Now, the Franks were a member of a Germanic-speaking people who invaded the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, so that's from 4 to 5, dominating present-day northern France, Belgium, and western Germany. The Franks established the most powerful Christian kingdom of early medieval Western Europe. The name France, Francia, is derived from their name. So the Franks was a Germanic tribe who you can see up here, they real small up here. Right? This is the year 420 AD. This will be 56 years before Rome fall. But it says that during that century, they will invade Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, dominating present-day northern France, Belgium, and western Germany. The Franks established the most powerful Christian kingdom of early medieval Western Europe, because at one time all these barbarian kingdoms had their own form of Christianity, but it will be the Frankish Empire who will unite them under the Catholicism that we know today. But we'll have to look at that in a different video. Right? So here was the Franks by 500 AD, 25 years after Rome fell. Here's the Frankish Empire, or the Franks. They took over this area. You see the Saxons, Visigoths, the Suevi over here in Portugal, in Spain. Okay. Now, the Franks may have had one omnipotent God, All-Father, or the All-Father. Variants of this phrase, All-Father, like All-Father, usually refer to Wotan, Odin. This is who you get your Wednesday from. Woden's Day has become Wednesday. And the Franks probably believed in Wotan as chief of blessings, whom the first historian Tacitus called Mercurius, and his consort Freya, as well as Donner or Thor, god of thunder, and Zeo, Tyr, whom Tacitus calls Mars. So you see the synchronism that Tacitus had used between their Roman gods and these Norsemen's or Germanic people's gods. So he compared Wotan or Odin to Mercurius, right? And, we see that Donner or Thor, this is the same, the Franks had the same religious belief as the Celts. They had the same names, Odin, Freya, and Donner or Thor. Now the Carolingians or Charlemagne the Great or Charles the Great reigned in 768 to 814. He would restore the Western Roman Empire in cooperation with the papacy and spread Christianity into central and northern Germany. So in the 8th century, Charlemagne the Great will be the one who will unite all of these barbarian kingdoms who have different forms of Christianities, who all came from pagan belief system or Germanic belief system, and many of them still held on to it. All of them didn't convert. All of them did not convert to the Christianity, but Charlemagne will come and unite all of them under one Christianity, which is what Catholic means, a universal Christianity instead of all these Gothic Christian, Celtic Christian, Arianism, who would unite them under one Christianity that you know today as the Catholic Church. This will be the form of the Catholic Church that you know of today. And Charlemagne will establish his empire in 810. And what you see here in this Charlemagne Empire, this is the same as the Holy Roman Empire. So when you hear people say that the Roman Empire fell, but it was resurrected well, yes, it fell as Romans, but it was resurrected as barbarians mixed with Romans, because the last kingdom will be iron mixed with clay. So now we're going to talk about the Vandals. The Vandals were Germanic people who first inhabited what is now southern Poland. They established Vandal kingdoms on the Iberian Peninsula, Mediterranean islands, and North Africa in the 5th century. So the Iberian Peninsula is Spain, right? The Mediterranean islands and North Africa in the 5th century, that would be Carthage. So as a matter of fact, the Moors will be the ones who will run the Vandals out of Carthage, if I'm not mistaken, right? So from their invasion of the North Africa in 429 onward, the Vandals, now notice they invaded Africa in 429. Rome didn't fall till 476. So the Vandals is already in the territory that Rome once conquered. They took North Africa from the Romans. The Vandals, who were predominantly followers of Arianism, persecuted Nicene Christians. The Vandal kingdom ended in 534, when it was conquered by Belisarius in the Vandalic War and incorporated into the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire. The surviving Vandals either assimilated into the indigenous African population or were dispersed among the Byzantine territories. So the Vandals, they didn't just disappear. They assimilated in that Carthage, that northern part of Africa. We're not talking about the Sudan or below the Sudan. We're talking about that northern part of Africa. That's where they stayed, and some was taken to the Byzantine or to Eastern Rome, and in other sources it says others spread it throughout Europe. The Vandals are described by the ancient sources as tall, blonde, and good-looking. Those Vandals who survive continue to live under Roman rule in North Africa or migrated to Europe. So that's world history. So those Vandals spread through Europe. They continue to live under Roman rule in North Africa. Vandal skeletons cannot be distinguished from those of other Germanic people because these were all the same people. It says the Vandals are described by the ancient sources as tall, blonde, and good-looking, just like Tacitus, just like the other Roman poets, just like everyone has said so far. So here's a map of the Vandals. I'm going to zoom in on this map of the Vandals, right? So we see the red here is the Vandals, right? So we see the Huns chasing everybody into Rome. Here's the split of Rome where it's white. That's Rome. Where it's tan, that's Germania. So here's where the Vandals came. They came across through through France, up into Spain, crossed over to northern Africa, to Carthage. And that's the area that they held until they were conquered. Now the Anglo-Saxons. So the Anglo-Saxons were a cultural group who inhabited England in the early Middle Ages. The Anglo-Saxons established the concept and the Kingdom of England, and though the modern English language owes somewhat less than 26% of its words to their language, this includes the vast majority of words used in everyday speech. So remember, the Anglo-Saxons were, like I said, the Jutes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Frisons. And they came together across this water into Western UK and established the English kingdom or England. So the Anglo-Saxons are a people of different tribes who all had the same culture and the same religious beliefs. They consisted of Angles, Saxons, Jutes, and Frisons. Right? You can see them in this map up here. How they came across into the land that they are from. Right? But if you look up here, this little, where this red dot is, this is Norway, Sweden, Denmark, where the tall, blonde hair, yellow hair, blue-eyed people are from. As you can see right here. Right? Kingdom of Norway, Kingdom of Sweden, right? Denmark. So if I go back on the map, so you can see where the Anglo-Saxons came from. Here's the tip of Norway. So here we are right here. That's where they came from. They came across the water into what we call the UK today. Although Christianity dominates the religious history of the Anglo-Saxons, life in the 5th and 6th century, right? So that's 4 to 5, that's during the time Rome fell, and then 5 to 6. Life of the 5th and 6th century was dominated by pagan religious beliefs with a Scandinavian Germanic heritage. Early Anglo-Saxon society attached great significance to the horse. A horse may have been an acquaintance of the god Woden, and or they may have been, according to Tacitus, confidants of the gods. Horses were closely associated with gods, especially Odin and Freya. So even in the 4th century when Rome fell, and 100 years after that, those Saxons that was up there in Britain still held their pagan ways. And all of them worship Woden and Freya, just like the rest of the barbaric tribes that we've went through so far. Everything is consistent. The Alemanni. The Alemanni, or Alemanni, were a confederation of Germanic tribes on the upper Rhine River. Now, you remember that Rhine River was what divided the Gauls from the barbarians, according to the Romans. First mentioned by Cassius Dio in the context of the campaign of Caracalla of 213. The Alemanni captured the Agri documents in 260 and later expanded into present-day Alsace and northern Switzerland, leading to establishment of Old and High German language in those regions by 8th century, named Alemannia. So in 213, right, those people took over this land. They were on this Rhine River, which is right, I think, yeah, here's the Rhine River. So they were here, and it said they came across here, and they took over this land, which is we know today as Norway and Sweden. Northern Switzerland, right? They are settled by the Alemanni. The area settled by the Alemanni, or Alemanni, corresponds roughly to the area where Alemannic German dialects remain spoken, including German, Swabia, Baden, French, Alsace, German-speaking Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Austrian and Vorarlberg. So those places that they speak those languages, which they do speak today, because these are modern places that we're giving you today, or that they're giving you, is where the Alemanni settled. The Christianization of the Alemanni took place during Merovingian times, 6th to 8th century. We know that in the 6th century, the Alemanni were predominantly pagan, and in the 8th century, they were predominantly Christian. The intervening 7th century was a period of genuine syncretism during which Christianity, symbolism, and doctrine gradually grew in influence. So, like I was saying, the Alemanni, they said in 6th century they were all pagans. Next, 8th century they're Christians. And in between the 7th century, they used syncretism with the Bible, comparing the Most High Yah and His Son and the Holy Spirit, and using it with Odin, Freya, and Thor. And the influence grew, and they accepted Christianity. These were the barbarian kingdoms who sacked Rome. Today they are collectively called Europeans, as if they are the only people in Europe. But European today is referred to as the white people living in Europe, as opposed to the other people of India, China, Arab, those states, although they're also in Europe. The word European doesn't apply to them. Now, all of the ex-barbarian kingdoms are of Germanic descent. The majority of them are described as being tall, with yellow hair and blue eyes. All of them followed Norse mythology of Odin, Freya, and Thor, whom they called the Trinity prior to their conversion to Christianity. These people will be united under one church, hence the word Catholic, which means universal. I used to think that universal applied to the entire universe, like silly me, right? But in this case, universal or Catholic was meant to describe all of these once barbarian nations who were eventually converted but all had a different form of Christianity, unifying under one doctrine. These nations became the Christian nations of the world. It was these ex-barbarians who were in charge when all the Papal Bulls were signed, including the Inquisitions and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal in 1492. It wasn't Romans, it wasn't just Rome, it was iron mixed with clay. It was Rome mixed with Norsemen. It was Rome's mythology mixed with Norse mythology. Now, it just so happens that these are also the same people who colonized the entire world and held a conference in Berlin to divide up Africa, right? Every last one of them. All these Western powers right here, these little Western powers, are the ones who colonize this entire world. Fulfilling Daniel's prophecy that states they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, which now makes a whole lot of sense knowing that they all claim to be children of the gods. And all the wars that have been fought since the establishing of their kingdoms have been them versus them for the most part, including World War I and World War II, and soon to come World War III. But the most important thing to know about these people are that these are the people who will fight Christ. Daniel told us that the stone, which is Christ, shall smite the feet of the image, causing it all to collapse, showing us that the people that Christ would actually fight are the 10 toes. A second witness is the book of Revelation. Now, Revelation 13 first tells us about the beast and the 10 horns on his head. So we're going to read this to see that the 10 horns are a part of the beast. They are attached to the beast's head the same way a horn is attached to a bull. So that means they're part of the beast. Now it says, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy. Now, precepting that with Revelation 17 and 12, this is how we know that the 10 horns on the beast's 7 heads are the same as the 10 toes on Daniel chapter 2 statue, right? Because Revelation 17 tells us that the 10 horns are 10 kings, and that these 10 kings shall make war with the Lamb, while Daniel 2 tells us that the stone carved without hands shall strike the 10 toes. Revelation chapter 17, verse 12. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So that we see that these 10 horns are 10 kings, right? And they shall give their power to the beast. But verse 14 says that these 10 horns shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. So Revelation 19 and 19 it also gives us another view. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth, those are the 10 horns or the 10 toes, and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. Revelation 19 and 19 backs all of that up and let us know that these 10 toes, who are the Western European nations of today, the ones who colonize the earth, the ones who rule the world today, are the ones who will fight Christ at his coming. Not the Asians or the Hamites or the African nations, not the Eastern Indians or the Eskimos, but according to Revelation 19, it will be the Christian nations of today. Now, how ironic is that? So now that we have found the 10 toes, who are also the 10 horns on the beast, this will help us in finding the other 2 characters, the beast and the whore who rides him. If it is the Most High's will, we will continue this study in the future lessons to come. Shalom, family.
Stay focused. Yahweh we choose, we worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused. Don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused. Israelite blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused. Hebrew we got next. I preach the Miguel's at next. Stay focused. Yahweh we choose, we worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused. Don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused.